Thank you very much for that. I realize I have to cut my talk down by about a third, so I'll try and do it quickly. If you feel rushed, you know why. I was going to speak about three different things. I turned 60 last year, so I think I'm now allowed to pontificate. So I was going to pontificate a little. Then I was going to tell you the work we've done in UK and its relevance to youth mental health. And finally, I was going to use the word global in an international geographic sense. You know, are we talking about youth as where they really live? I will try and cover all three, but I promise to cut them short. And this is what we are talking about. This is the most complex entity in the known universe, right? And we can't really know it, because to know it, we have to use itself. It's like trying to lift yourself on a chair that you're sitting. We do not have the tools to understand the mind. We don't even know the relationship between the mind and the brain. The neuroscientists who write books like Consciousness Explained, they're just talking. I'll not use an impolite word, but we don't really know. We don't really, and it's one of those fundamental, like Gödel's mathematical theorem, incompleteness. A set of everything cannot contain itself. It's not a technological thing. The thing is, we are told technologically we'll master it. We won't. We won't master it because that's a limit of our understanding. The reason why I say that is that, before I do, this should have been the first slide. Quite a bit of what I'm going to say is already in a number of publications. There was a review in 2012 that Max Birchwood and I did. Then 4 years later, there was another one led by Ashok Malla. Then another 4 years, one called Global Research Priorities, and then one very recently. And they keep coming on because the field is expanding very rapidly. And your own Professor Mary Cannon and Barbara Dooley and other Irish colleagues have been involved. And you've done very well in lots of areas. You've been exemplars of what good services look like. So I'm not going to give you lots of data from these papers. I'd suggest that you see them. I'll tell you data that you may not have seen, but not a lot of it. There's a comic line. 1 in 4 suffers from mental illness. If that's true, think of 3 of your friends. If they're not mentally ill, it must be you. Okay? It is a funny line. It's a clever line, but it also highlights the problem of using the word mental illness. There is no such thing as mental illness. It's like saying 1 in 10 people has pain. You know, so it doesn't tell you what an illness. Mental illness is a whole range spectrum of disorders. And when you go from the entire spectrum of mental disorders, from social deviance down to brain pathology like dementia, 1 in 4 do in their lifetime suffer from a mental illness. One of the things that's really caught the public imagination now is that the COVID has unleashed an epidemic of mental illness in youth. I'm not going to cover that. If it comes up in question and answer, I'll try and cover that. I'm going to try and restrict to serious mental disorders like psychosis. They haven't really increased in prevalence. Their experience of care has become worse in COVID. But what we've done with psychotic disorders has lessons for all the other disorders of youth. That's why I'm focusing on it. The problem that I see, and this is pontification, is that the success of the West, the scientific success of empiricism, rests upon Aristotelian logic, which is a statement is either true or it's false. The Latin word that is tertium non datur, which means the middle is not given. Right? So in science, you say a thing is either true or not true. And our scientific method is based on that. Our physics and maths is based on that. It's very successful. Bridges, stay standing, and we send probes to Mars because binary logic works. 2 and 2 are 4. It is a true statement. In complex problems, however, it falls down. 1 in 4 is mentally ill. You can't apply binary logic to it. There is another form of logic, which is Buddhist. It is called Chatuskoti, which means four corners. And Chatuskoti states, a statement may be true, it may be false, it may be both true and false, it may be neither true nor false. And Nagarjuna was the 4th century mathematician, Buddhist mathematician, who gave an elegant mathematical proof of it. I'm actually writing a paper on what this means in complex problems. And if we have time, I will tell you why. What we are talking about is not a complicated problem, it's a complex problem. There is subtle but profound difference between complex and complicated problems. And complex problems do not lend themselves to binary thinking. Our entire political structure is based on the idea, for me to be right, you have to be wrong. You get politicians together, they'll mostly agree on everything. But the adversarial system means that they have to say, and so we use that everywhere. Drugs are bad, psychotherapy is good, hospitals are bad, community is good, for A is bad. And so it's constant polarization of a very complex reality. So we're talking here about young people, and young people, as we know from our own experience of growing up and watching our children grow, is that eternal wish to stay a child, but also the need to get on. My son, when he was about 8, he asked me to carry him. We were watching something live, some open air thing, and he said, "Can you carry me?" I said, "No, I won't." He said, "Why?" I said, "You're grown up. I used to carry you. You're grown up." He said, "In that case, I don't want to grow up." and so that really is the problem that many adolescents have. And we know this is oft repeated, oft rehearsed. The greater burden of disability due to illness in youth is from mental illness. It's a paradox. When people are winning Wimbledon championships at 18, they are psychologically their most vulnerable. And the onset of mental disorders before the age of 25, 75% before the age of 25, 50% before the age of 16. That's now been shown in 2 or 3 different large data sets, US and Scandinavian. And there is kind of quite a bit of neurobiological reasons for that. When I was training, we were taught there are disorders of childhood onset, brain stops developing at 18, and there are disorders of adult onset. And schizophrenia is adult onset, and conduct disorder is childhood onset. That's been turned on its head. And the neurobiological evidence now shows that the brain continues to mature till the age of 25 and doesn't become static after that. There's a study showing that taxi drivers in London, the longer they've driven a taxi, the greater is the area of map reading in their brains. Brain is a plastic organ like everything else. That's why we ask people with early dementia to do crosswords. It's a plastic organ like anything else in the body. I'm doing another paper which is which is the origin of the Freudian model. Freud gave a lecture in 1938 where he first introduced the idea of the id-ego, superego. And he said it's like a rider. Ego is a rider pulled by 2 horses, superego and id. Now, those of you who are classically trained will know that he lifted this directly from Plato. In Plato's dialogues, there's a character called Phaedrus. Phaedrus rides a chariot. 1 horse is reason, 1 horse is emotion. They pull in different directions. The chariot breaks. Phaedrus dies. Now, several thousand years before Phaedrus, before Plato, the Vedas have the same model of the soul. The Katha Upanishad, this young man asked his father, "So how do I know the self?" And the father says, "Your self is the charioteer. Your body is the chariot. Your senses and your desires are the horses. And your intellect, buddhi, from which comes Buddha, are the reins by which you can control those horses." And I'm not talking, this is not all plagiarism. These are all fundamental truths that we all know. Our young people are struggling at that age because the part of the brain that is restraining horse, that is weaker than the impulsive, risk-taking, pleasure-seeking part. And it is, when they sleep too much, their brains are working a lot. When they're risk-taking, that's how the brain works, and that's where the origin of mental illness also often lies. Do you know the answer to this question? What is the similarity between the treatment of schizophrenia and the loss of the British Empire? Huh? Both involve an orderly management of decline. When I started training in psychiatry, this is what we were taught. Schizophrenia is a chronic, progressive, deteriorating condition. I remember a young man being told, I was in India by a consultant, you've got schizophrenia, you'll never get better. This therapeutic pessimism is still built in. Even now, psychiatrists won't use the term. Right? They think it's stigmatizing. And so they think, so people who really can't change the world, change language, because that's all they feel able to do. We did a number of studies in the 90s in Nottingham where we showed that all the effort of putting investment into community care had not improved the outcomes of first episode psychosis. Nottingham was one of the first cities in Britain to close all its long-stay hospitals. The sector model of care, with each team covering a geographic area, comes from Nottingham. And Nottingham was also one of the sites of the WHO DOSMED study, from which come all those findings, 1% of schizophrenia prevalence or urban-rural differences. So it was a very important study. We replicated it and we showed that first episode psychosis had not improved. In fact, at some levels, people had got worse. At least when they were in hospital, somebody used to go and wake them in the morning, get up, brush your teeth. Now in the community, there's no community out there saying, flock to my bosom, you miserable wretches. I will love you and look after you. You put them in bed sits. A nurse goes every 2 weeks, gives a Modicate injection. You've not improved their lives. And then Max Birchwood did a very important paper called the critical period hypothesis, where he showed that the disability and poor outcomes in first episode psychosis accumulate in the first 2 to 3 years. In fact, we showed that disability predates symptoms. I used to believe that you start hearing voices, then you become disabled. You actually stop going to school, you decline, you stop seeing your friends, you lock yourself up, and then you start hearing voices. Disability has already set in. So I set up as part of, I should go to the next one. There was a movement building up at that time. Pat McGorry in Melbourne, Max Birchwood in Birmingham, and Ashok Malla in London, Ontario. We were talking about developing early intervention services. So I got a chance to set up the first NHS-funded early intervention service in London in 2001. This was the model we proposed, that it would have a community treatment program, which would be a specialized team providing evidence-based care as early as possible, a prodrome clinic, and an early detection team with a dedicated ward. Now, the government agreed to fund this bit in 2004. This was the time of plenty. Gordon Brown had a money tree. Anything you asked for, he gave. And we asked for sustainable funding. And our condition was, you will not take money from any other part of the service to give it to us. You will not weaken another part of the service to strengthen us. You will give us new money. They gave us £75 million. So we set it up, and by the time this paper came out, the first trial had been published, the Leo trial. The second one came from Denmark quite soon. Early intervention in psychosis works. Specialist teams will get people better, both symptomatically and functionally. And each person who goes to an early intervention service in England saves the NHS £5,000 a year. We've learned this. What we've also learned is that once you discharge them from early intervention care, the gains decline. They are not completely lost, but they decline. So now the question we are asking ourselves is, how long to keep the grip of early intervention? But it's been an astounding success. One of the big successes in that was, we get people back to work or back to education. And that is our most significant achievement. When the Schizophrenia Commission report published its findings, It was led by Robin Murray. This is a 2012 statement. It was renewed in 2017. Early intervention in psychosis has been the most positive development in mental health services since the beginning of community care. I did not come into early intervention evangelical. I thought what we were doing is not right. People said to me, how do you know? Where is the evidence that early intervention would work? I said, I can't give you the best possible evidence because you have to do trials, and I'll do a trial, and then you'll find a fault in a trial, and then you'll say this and that. I'm saying the best available evidence is that first episode psychosis is not doing well. We've got to try something different. I came agnostic, I became evangelical. I didn't start evangelical. We then, at that time when we started, the duration of untreated psychosis in England was about 2 years, mean duration. People had to wait about 2 years before they got effective treatment. You know what it is now? 3 months. And we are trying to reduce it to 2 weeks. We have a government mandate. Every person who develops first episode psychosis must get effective treatment within 2 weeks of coming to services. 50% must get that. There's a rating of services for that. People said it's mad, you're not going to be able to do it. But we've done it from 2 years to 2 months to 3 years. 2 years to 3 months, I do beg your pardon. One of the other things we did was we did this massive community program. Said you come to Birmingham in I think it was 2013, 14 we were doing this. We had these big signs on billboards, behind buses. So we did in one area, we did this program, and then we compared DUP with another area. And we halved DUP by the public education program. Then again, this is published. So early intervention works. Early intervention in psychosis really works. There have been lots of now models of early intervention in bipolar disorders, personality disorders, neurodevelopmental disorders, with reasonable success. Psychosis is different for all kinds of reasons. It has a measure like DUP. There is no rationale for delayed intervention. Absolutely none. George Patton's work in Australia shows that teenagers go through a period of turmoil. It's called the strung and angst. The strum and angst. Yeah, that was the romantic movement about literary movement about writing about heightened emotions. The French were all into strum and angst. So teenagers have strum and angst. If the continuity of that into later life depends on how long they have it in the first instance. 6 months seems to be a cutoff. If you've got significant symptoms as a teenager that last more than 6 months, it's likely to continue. And if it continues, it can be homotypic, meaning the same picture unfolds along adulthood, or heterotypic. It starts as anxiety, depression, becomes psychosis. So it can unfold different way. This is the sexiest bit of psychiatry right now, prodromal intervention. And I think we have to be humble here about what early intervention in prodromal services can achieve. And there I think people who argue that we might be treating false positive, also true. I don't have time to take you through that. And people who say this is a help-seeking population who needs help, they are also true. This is Chatuskoti logic, not binary logic. Prodromal interventions, you can make all kinds of statements about it with a bit of truth in them. When we were setting up services, we knew the money was coming. I had a group in London where we knew we were having 9 services. Each service would have X number of staff. We got people together to say what would services look like and who would run them. And I thought the maximum argument, the most bitter disputes will be between psychologists and psychiatrists about how to treat psychosis. We obviously don't like each other. And to my surprise, the biggest arguments were between child psychiatrists and adult psychiatrists. They agreed on nothing. Nothing. They didn't agree on what to call it, how to diagnose it, whether to diagnose it, how to treat it, whether to treat it. Nothing at all. They were poles apart. I had one child psychiatrist saying, I never make a diagnosis of psychosis. I said, you're proud of it? And then we wrote a paper on where this comes from. It's a very interesting. Historically, they have, adult psychiatry grew out of concern about an individual with mental illness, where the idea is that the pathology is in the individual's brain, right? So you treat the individual. Child psychiatry grew out of a social movement of concerns about what were called juvenile delinquents, homeless kids on the streets, first in America, then during the wars in Europe. So women trying to provide a in loco parentis model for children. So the child psychiatry paradigm is of a family, put a support around that. Child is not the problem doesn't lie in the child, the problem lies in what the child lacks. And so the entire approach to the disorder, to the problem, is very different. They speak in terms of problems rather than diagnosis. They say, oh, you can't give drugs. And so it's a very tricky, and we've done, in Europe, we've just done we've published it now. The training in child psychiatry and adult psychiatry is so diverse across Europe, their divisions are even more stark. So I said, okay, what happens to young people who are under child psychiatry care with psychosis and have to move to adult care? So we did this study called TRACK. Started in 2006, published in 2010. To my surprise, this was the first study, longitudinal study, of transition in psychiatry. I didn't realize that. It's not very often that you come into it, you uncharted territory. Here be monsters. I just wandered into here be monsters, and we found that 50% of young people fall through the care gap as they approach their transition boundary, and the other 50 who make it through get a very bum deal. So we set up criteria called optimal transition. Very simple 4 criteria. A young person and his family must have a meeting with the clinicians to be told about transition. There should be some amount of information exchange. It could be a letter. There should be at least one period of joint working, handover, one meeting. As a result of which, 3 months later, either the young person should be suitably engaged with adult services or discharged. Out of our cohort of almost 200 kids, 4 kids had optimal transition. We've got a statistician planning to do fancy modeling for predictors of transition. We had 4 kids. You couldn't do anything. When we presented at the Department of Health, you could hear jaws hitting the floor. And this got a lot of attention. This then became a very big thing. We then did this study in Europe, which is the first ever trial of a transitional care model in any branch of medicine. It's over 1,000 kids in 8 European countries. I don't have time to take you through it, but some of the papers are out, some are still being published. Take this one. In terms of service provision, let's take availability of CAMS beds. The difference between the best provided and the worst provided in Europe is 49-fold. The number of services is 26-fold. Now, there is no epidemiological reason why one country in Europe should have 50 times as many beds as another. This is entirely a function of how you prioritize your funding. As we found, only a quarter had continuity of care at the point of transition. This is across 8 countries. We deliberately chose different models. Private funding model, insurance model. Ireland was part of it. Ireland was led by Fiona McNicholas. So Ireland is part of this study. In terms of outcomes of kids, if you take this blue line, these are the kids who have the most interruptions in their continuity of care. And you can see their problems don't get better, they actually get worse. And finally this, our model of managed transition, which is basically a clinic decision-making tool for clinicians, takes 10 minutes to do with a young person. That seems to make a difference. Those who have managed transition seem to have greater drop in their HANOSCA scores. It's statistically significant, but the absolute number, the drop in HANOSCA score is very small. So we don't know what the clinical significance of it is. It's certainly experienced as better. Young people who receive it say, no, we felt better. We felt looked after. So maybe even if you don't make a difference symptomatically, the experience of care is better. Then it's become a very big issue. I was involved in this BBC documentary that's worth seeing. Europe had a big meeting. This was the European Council. You can probably see me there. And there is a woman not listening to me at all. European Parliament was very keen to get this transition forward, and I think things are moving. And NICE has now guidelines for the first time for transition from pediatric to adult care. They're very simple, very straightforward. It's not rocket science. It really is not a difficult thing to do. It doesn't require money or effort. It just requires thinking about it. And now in UK we developed the first ever 0 to 25 service in Birmingham. Right? The service goes from 0 to 25. It's called Forward Thinking Birmingham. I'm short of time. I would love to gossip about it because it was a big achievement for me, and yet it was miserably done. So badly done that some people said we're not doing it again. Only because of implementation. The principle was right. We are still going ahead. It's now part of the long-term NHS plan. I can come another time and tell you about this. Okay, final part of my talk, and I have, if I'm correct, 8 minutes left. Where are the young people in the world? They are in low and middle income countries. This is a population graph of India. Japan, you could invert it. So you could for Russia, or for Italy, for France. Where is the research done in youth mental health? These are MRI studies. You can see large parts of white where absolutely no research in depression in young people. And yet the relationship is relatively straightforward. For every $1,000 increase in GDP, your DUP falls by 6 weeks. The poorer the country, the longer the duration of untreated psychosis. This is the first ever study of mental health in Somaliland, which we did a few years ago. Somaliland is not Somalia. It's been safe for 25 years. It's not recognized by many countries. This is the only psychiatric provision in Somaliland. There is no psychiatric bed. 1 in 10, by some estimates, 1 in 10 families have a family member in chains because they have either a chronic psychosis or learning disability with aggressive behavior or epilepsy. 1 in 10. In India, which is now a high-income country, in August 2004, in South India, there is a place called Arwadi. Arwadi is where the Muslim saint who brought Islam to India in the 8th century, he's buried there. Over 1200 years, it's become a place of pilgrimage where people come to get their mentally ill healed. Sprawling compound with hundreds of buildings, and they go there and they're locked up and they are prayed for in the morning and beaten in the evening. One night, one of the buildings caught fire. 26 of the patients died. You can see they were chained to their beds. The guards left. They were burnt alive, and now India was forced to do something about it. They haven't managed to do much about it yet. And this is all over. All around the world, many young people with serious mental disorders are chained. Not because the families are awful, but because the families have no other way to manage them. It's for the safety, especially if it's a young woman and she's sexually vulnerable. We've done something very interesting. We've just finished it. We said, let's do early intervention in India. And people said, you're mad. you've hardly got psychiatrists or teams. So we said, let us try and do this. Again, I would love to tell you more about it. I can't. So for one thing we did was we said, take the best bits of early intervention, turn them into a protocol, manualize it, give it to all the teams in government services, wherever psychiatrists are, say, use this with the resources that you have. We use two centers. One is the tertiary center in Delhi, where the catchment population is 500 million. The other is a small community group in Chennai, SCARF, very different populations. But in both, very rapid improvement once people get treatment. First episode psychosis is exquisitely sensitive to treatment. People get better very, very quickly. And one of the reasons is family involvement. Again, take it from me. We did a school-based screening. We screened 15,000 kids on depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and psychotic-like experiences. 12% are screening moderate to severe on all four. So therein lie some cases within those 12. That is 12%. So that 12%, 14,000 is about 1,400, 1,500 kids. We gave them mental literacy. We told them where to go for help. As far as, to sought help. So what we are doing now is we are doing this massive program in slums in Nigeria and Bangladesh. We are going to work with faith healers, and we are going to train them into identifying mental illness among young people and send them to psychiatrists. They see us, I've just come back from Nigeria, they see us as competitors for the business, so it's a very difficult problem to solve, but we are trying to solve it. Another model we have used in South India is Tele Psychiatry, where a bus with a built-in television and its own network connection goes, shows movies of mental illness, goes back away again 2 weeks later. Villagers bring the family member, a local health worker speaks to the family member with a doctor with a video link sitting in Chennai. Very successful. I think that's going to be the future in LMICs. And with World Psychiatry, we've started a group called Early Intervention in Low and Middle Income Countries, which I chair. And I'm going to present data from this and other studies in Bangkok in about 2 months' time. So I'll stop here. I'm sorry I've had to rush through this. This is my take-home message to you, that the wealth of a nation really is the mental health of its youth. Mental illnesses afflict the young. They rob them of their most productive years. And it's for our own sake, not just our kids, our families, as a society. If we must count everything in pounds and pennies, even on that crude valuing of life, mental illness is important. You were saying about sustainable funding. I'll end with a story. It came to my mind when you were speaking. So this woman's done shopping, gone out of a shopping center, and there's a hobo sitting outside asking for some change. Have you got some spare change? And he's got a bottle of vodka, and he's swigging through that. Have you got some change? And she says, if I give you some money, will you buy more vodka? He said, of course. She says, how much vodka do you drink? He says, I have maybe 2 liter bottles. Sometimes I have some strong brew along with that. And she says, how much does that cost you? He says, 10, 15 pounds. He says, how much in a month? He said, oh, I'm not very good at maths. 10, 50, I don't know, for 400 pounds. How much in a year? He said, well, I don't know. 5,000 pounds. So how many years have you been drinking? He says, 40 years. She says, how much is that? He says, I have no idea how much that is. But yeah. What are you trying to say? He says, do you realize, had you not been drinking, by now you would have a Ferrari. He says, oh yes, true. He says to the woman, he says, do you drink? She says, of course not. He says, where's your Ferrari? If you want a Ferrari, you have to invest in a Ferrari. You can't say, I'll stop having biscuits in our coffee room and we'll save money and then we'll buy a Ferrari. It doesn't work like that. When in Nigeria, in the hospital, Arrow Hospital, which is one of the oldest psychiatric hospitals in West Africa, the medical superintendent who started the hospital is buried there. He worked there for 45 years. His German wife lived after his death there. She's buried there. Now, we get a chief executive of an NHS trust. He gets a 5-year contract. In his first year, he has to show he has done something good. What can you do in a year or two? You can't build anything. You can dismantle something. So he stops something. Year 3, he says, look at my results. Year 4, he looks for another job. Year 5, he leaves. They leave a trail of destruction behind them. The system promotes that. If you want to build a garden from seed, it'll take you 20 years. It's like seeing a young child become a man. It takes years of investment and hard work, and you may still not succeed. At the end, you think, I may have got this right or may not have got this right. Our 5-year political cycle, our 1-year annual cycle is absolutely antithetical to any good unless we in the West get that right. We are going to be back here. Thank you very much.